The playoff picture has changed dramatically. MV, please. And hot seats that just got hotter. All that and more, because it is time for Sunday Night Blitz. Welcome to Sunday Night Blitz. He's Frank Schwab. I'm Jason Fitz, and we are going to go through absolutely everything. We have just wrapped up the Sunday Night Football game as we sit down to tape, Frank, and we are going to break down everything, even the Saturday action, all the Sunday action. We're going to break down everything we saw today. But before we get to any of that, this is the first time we've gotten to hang out in a few days, and I have to start by making one very clear thing to the world. You are now required to go to every Raiders home game for the rest of time, all right? Because for anyone that doesn't know, I was at Allegiant Stadium Sunday night. The Raiders lose 3-0. You were at Allegiant Stadium Thursday night. The Raiders put 63 on the Chargers in a game so epic that it got the other organization's coach and GM fired. Like, it feels like you are the magic kiss that my beloved Raiders need.
I think it was more Brandon Staley than me,
okay.
But whatever. I loved it, man. Like, that was the first time I'd been to an NFL game as a fan since 1995. Saw Favre throw 5 touchdowns and beat the Bears at Lambeau Field that day. And I mean, now I get it. Like, it was an eye-opening experience to be back as a fan at an NFL game. Great atmosphere, great stadium. Not a great game, but it was great for you, Fitz. Like, you loved it. So,
oh yeah, speak for yourself. It was when's the last time you saw a team get 2 coaches fired in 1 year? Like, they got Josh McDaniels fired and Brandon Staley in the same year. Let's go.
It was great, man. And yes, I'll definitely take you up on your offer to go to every Vegas home game. Just send me out a week early. I'm good to go. Yeah.
It's a good time to tell the bosses, like, next year we should do a show together in Vegas on Sunday when the Raiders are playing on Monday night so that we can get turned at the game on Monday together. You know, maybe have a couple of beers.
Have I told you that lately, that you're a genius?
I'm just here to help. All right, let's see if that genius carries over to Sunday, because we have had a packed day with huge consequences. I cannot stress this enough. Some Sundays matter for the rest of the year. This was one of those, and you saw it in the Sunday night game where the Baltimore Ravens went out and clinched a playoff spot. In the process, they made the playoff future for the Jaguars much murkier than we ever thought it could be. They were dominant, they being the Ravens. The Jags looked like they were hanging on for dear life and were never really in this matchup. And I walked away from it, Frank, saying, man, maybe we should spend a little bit more time obsessing over the fact that the Ravens look clearly to be the best team in the AFC.
They do. We're going to get to another team that might be the best in the AFC in a little bit. They played Dallas today. But, I mean, this Ravens team has it all. And I think that they're a very good team that has greatness possible because of Lamar Jackson. I mean, look, I was shocked, actually, at the stats at the end of the game because they weren't nearly as high as I thought. It was one of those games that you needed to watch. If you watch that game, you're like, that was a Lamar Jackson game. He took over that game. He took the Ravens on his shoulders with key plays over and over. The Isaiah Likely throw is just unbelievable. I mean, that was his quote-unquote MVP moment, if there is one, if there is such thing in the NFL. Look, they're going to miss Mark Andrews, probably going to unfortunately miss Keaton Mitchell the rest of the way. That was an ugly-looking knee injury. But as long as they got Jackson and that defense, they have a shot. The defense is really, really, really good. And at this point, you do say, okay, we've been talking about, 49ers, best team, they're going to roll all this stuff. Well, we get to see them and the Ravens face off next week. And I can't sit here and tell you for sure that the 49ers are going to beat them. I think they will, but it also wouldn't shock me if the Ravens do. And we come out of that game saying, actually, why have we not noticed that the Ravens are the best team in the NFL this season?
I think that there's some room to have conversation about Harbaugh as a coach of the year type candidate too. Like, I know it's always goes to somebody that is performing on a team that we didn't expect, and I get that. But I really thought it was a key metric that they showed on TV that at the 2-minute warning this year, the Ravens have been ahead in every single game. Like, you think about their 3 losses, right? Like,
their 3 losses were all, I don't want to say fluky, but kind of. Like, I mean, they could have won. They could be sitting here at 12-1, even 13-0.
Yeah, they're 3 or 4 minutes of football time away from being undefeated right now. And they've done it in a year where they lost Mark Andrews, which would have been a reason that most teams would, like most analysts would give up on him, frankly. They've done it in a year with the new offensive coordinator. It took a second, I think, for them to get the rhythm they want. And now it just feels like a combination of the fact that guys have really gotten comfortable with this offense and knowing how to get open. And to your point, like, the number of times it felt like Lamar must have rolled around in Vaseline because they just couldn't bring him down. And then he rolls around around, flicks the ball downfield, and all of a sudden you remember why he's been an MVP and why he has that contract.
Yeah, I mean, on the play I talked about with Isaiah Likely, that great play where Likely made a great catch too. But Dwayne Smoot had him twice, basically. And his reaction after the play was so funny of just kind of like, what do I need to do? What else can I do? Because probably 31 other quarterbacks he's bringing down. And Lamar just keeps escaping until he can make a play. It's just so special that way. And to your point, like, they were very lucky to have Isaiah Likely on this team because, yes, they lost Mark Andrews, who's an incredible tight end, but Likely's really good too. It wasn't like they just had a zero there. And the other receivers are really starting to come along. I mean, Zay Flowers didn't do much tonight, but he's a heck of a player. Rashad Bateman's coming alive a little bit. Odell's still there. They still do have weapons for Lamar Jackson in this new look offense. And I think it's just all clicking for them right now. And they just look like a team. Look, they got two tough games coming. After the 49ers, they played the Miami Dolphins. We'll know after that who the number one seed in the AFC is. But if it's the Ravens, they're sitting there 2 home games away from a Super Bowl. You got to like their chances just because of the way John Harbaugh's a great coach. Lamar Jackson might be the MVP of the league. We'll probably talk about MVP in a little bit. This defense is stellar. They have all the pieces you really want to make a deep run.
You know me well enough at this point. We've been doing this together well enough. You know that I'm the first to admit when I've made a mistake. Like, I love to come up to the mountaintops.
You do make a lot of mistakes, too.
Yeah, well, that's fair. But at least I admit them. I think there are a ton of people right now out there in media and out there in fandom that need to step up and admit that they were wrong about Lamar Jackson and his contract, because it became such a talking point that you can't pay Lamar what he wants, blah, blah, blah. Look at the numbers right now. It's a career high in completion percentage right now with 2,900 yards essentially passing, 16 touchdowns, 6 picks, and that doesn't even account for the 644 yards on the ground, 5 touchdowns there. I'm just running those numbers by everybody because we've normalized greatness as we do all the time. And watching the game tonight, I just kept thinking, man, there are very few players in the league that are tougher to defend than Lamar Jackson. And for the last 2 years, we've made everything about his money. Now that he got his money, can we all step up and acknowledge he was worth every dime of it?
Yeah, and here's my rant. It's not necessarily against the media people or whatever. It's against the 31 other teams. They stood by almost 45 days while Lamar Jackson was on the franchise tag. Nobody brought him in for a visit. Nobody made him an offer. And I do not want to hear, oh, everybody knew the Ravens were going to match. I don't care if Giannis Antetokounmpo was available somehow in a similar situation. You think NBA teams would be like, no use trying. The Bucks are going to match anyway. It doesn't. No, they would do everything they could to make life difficult on the Milwaukee Bucks to get Giannis away. Or if Ohtani was in a similar situation in Major League Baseball,
even Mahomes,
right? NFL teams stood idly by while they're like, "Nah, we got Sam Howell. Nah, we got Desmond Ridder," and they watch a 26-year-old former unanimous MVP, the most electrifying player in the NFL, in my opinion, right now, just go back to the Ravens. They never made life tough on the Ravens. And everybody's like, oh, well, it's this secret, handshake agreement with the owners. If I'm a fan of any team, if I'm a fan of the Atlanta Falcons, because they were the most egregious team in this mix, right? If I'm a fan paying all my season ticket money to Arthur Blank, if I'm a fan paying parking, PSL, all this stuff you have to pay to be a fan these days, right? And I had to process through my head of the Falcons never tried to get Lamar Jackson because Arthur Blank didn't want to rock the ship with the other owners. That was more important to him than winning Super Bowl. Like, I'd be beyond furious, and they should be. Every time I watch Lamar Jackson play, I think of two things. This guy's awesome. And the second thing is, what were the other 31 NFL teams doing? Not that all 31 needed Lamar Jackson, of course. But there's, a dozen teams that I watched play today where I'm like, this quarterback play is atrocious. And tonight I'm going to watch a possible MVP of the league this year play when he was available to any other team for 2 first-round picks. And be like, oh, 2 first-round picks, that's a lot. Go look at the Bryce Young trade. Go look at the Russell Wilson trade. 2 first-round picks for an elite quarterback is nothing. So I don't want to hear any excuses. It was ridiculous that no team really tried to get Lamar Jackson this offseason.
Especially when you start talking about the Falcons. I think it's important to remember that this was a variable they controlled. Like, so often you can't get a quarterback because one wasn't available.
Right,
in the draft,
there's unavailable, right?
Like,
Sure.
The only thing that held the Falcons back from doing it was money. And when you look Arthur Blank in the eyes and you say, dude, you're worth $8.2 billion according to Forbes. Like, if money is the one variable that a billionaire uses to keep them from getting this epic quarterback that can turn their franchise around, like, who would the Falcons be right now if they had Lamar as their quarterback? They would be a Super Bowl contender with that roster. Instead, they went out and lost Carolina in a game that we'll cover later that shows that the entire organization's in turmoil. Like, all because Arthur Blank didn't want to spend the money or he wanted to protect the boys. Like, that makes no sense to me.
And I don't think it was the money. I really, truly think it was he didn't want to break ranks with the other owners, and they never sign each other as restricted free agents. And the Deshaun Watson contract, they didn't want to do that again. And it's just a ridiculous excuse to me when I hear, like, again, the Ravens were going to match anyway. So what? Nobody made it uncomfortable on the Ravens. Nobody was like, hey, you might match this. That's cool. But we're going to make it tough because we're going to give him $60 million a year. Okay, you want to match? Tip my cap. He's back here with your quarterback. We'll move on with Desmond Ridder. But at least we tried. And they didn't try. And again, there's 10 to 12 other teams that should have been trying and just didn't. And I think about that every single time I watch Lamar Jackson play this season.
I will say clearly, Frank, if we're ever on a reality TV contest together, I will stab you in the back as soon as possible if it helps me win. I just think we need more of that mentality in the world.
We'd be an alliance, though, wouldn't we?
We'd be an alliance to start with, but like I'd start making other alliances. Like I'd be all in for protecting myself. Like there's just no look. I just want to win. I'm not here to watch you win. I'm not. Like, I don't care what. Like I watched that whole Squid Games chat, like whatever that show was that was based on Squid Games, where they all were kumbaya with each other. Like if we all nominate ourselves, it could be fair. And I'm like, screw fair. I just want to win. Like I want you to lose and I want the money.
You're Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff hitting me in the back with a steel chair and give me a pile driver. Yeah.
100%.
I appreciate that old wrestling reference.
No. So. Yeah, but by the way, I love that. And, I think as long as I'm transparent about that, then you can't even be mad if I go back and forth between being a good guy and a bad guy. All right, so let's get to the next game from the weekend that had massive playoff implications, and it was an ass kicking. Like, the Bills didn't just beat the Cowboys. They dominated the Cowboys 31-10. And the most surprising part of this, I said this on one of the short features I did for Yahoo today. The surprising part of this, if I told you coming into the day that Josh Allen would be 7 of 15 passing for basically no yards, was not the key running the football. Like, this game had very little to do with Josh Allen, and that the Bills would run away with the win, I think you'd be pretty surprised. But the Bills went out and replicated what we saw Arizona do earlier this year. They just ran the ball down the throats of the Cowboys over and over and over again.
Yeah, and that's pretty clearly the recipe against the Cowboys, right? Like, they're going to have to deal with that the rest of the season. Teams are going to be like, we saw what the Bills did to you. We remember what Arizona did to you. San Francisco did to you earlier in the year. So we're going to play too, and you're going to have to stop it. So definitely Cowboys exposed a little bit. We'll get to them, I'm sure, in a second. First, the Bills, though. You're right. Like, all season, me and you have been talking about this. Me and Charles Robinson talking about this for years before. The Bills need to be balanced, and it can't all be on Josh Allen's shoulders. I can't remember a game in the Josh Allen era, really off the top of my head, where he was such a non-factor. He had the great line afterwards. He's like, I was a kid in the chemistry class who didn't do any work on the project, but still got an A anyway. And it's so true. And he had to feel so like a weight was lifted off of him, that this was the James Cook game. This wasn't Josh Allen shaking off 28 defenders and trying to hit Stephon Diggs downfield. This was a team effort, and it showed a dimension the Bills didn't have before. That's what makes me excited about them. And I've said this, I said it all week. The Bills, to me, were the team that either they're going to miss the playoffs or make the Super Bowl. I can't sit here and tell you right now that the Bills aren't making the Super Bowl, because I think they're in the playoffs after this win. I think that this is the win that pushes them into the field, maybe as a 7 seed. But who in the AFC, aside from the Ravens, who we've talked about a lot, do you just think the Bills cannot beat? I mean, this team should have beat the Eagles in Philly, did beat the Chiefs in Kansas City, and then destroyed the Cowboys this week. Those are 3 elite teams that they just dominated. I'm all in on this Bills team again. I think that they're alive and very much alive when it comes to even possibly making a Super Bowl run.
I mean, right now, I feel like the Bills are going to win their division, and the path to that's pretty clear.
Well could,
They're 2 games back of the Dolphins, but I will remind everybody, as usual, the Dolphins beat bad teams and struggle against good teams. We know that. Look at the remainder of their schedule. They got the Cowboys, they got the Ravens, and then they end with the Bills. If they drop either of those 2 games while the Bills are going out taking care of easier teams, I think that's a possibility. We're going to walk into this Week 18 matchup, and it's a winner-take-all matchup in Miami
that's your
for
flex.
the division.
Yeah. That's your flex game on Sunday night. We're going to be watching the Bills and Dolphins play for the AFC East. You could very well be right there.
And I love every ounce of that. And it's interesting because it speaks to why they made the change at offensive coordinator to me. Today I was watching the game saying, okay, now we understand why Ken Dorsey is no longer the coordinator. I just think that sometimes you have to mix things up and you have to do what's working, even if that seems boring and monotonous. And that's what they were doing throughout the course of this game. Like, they didn't try to get cute. Everybody knew what was coming. They just executed it, and the Cowboys had no answer.
Yeah, sometimes people get all, why do you make an in-season coaching change? Sometimes it does give you a kickstart. Don't forget the 2012 Baltimore Ravens fire Cam Cameron as offensive coordinator, promote Jim Caldwell. Their offense goes on a tear and they win the Super Bowl. Would it really surprise us if the Bills went on a similar run? Not to me, not at this point, not the way they're playing. They are so battle-tested, and I think they're going to get to the playoffs and feel really, really confident that, hey, we saved our season. We're here. We don't take a backseat to anybody. They bring on the Ravens. We don't care. We're going to go play them. I really like what I saw out of the Bills today.
Well, and now on the other side of this is the Cowboys take a loss, and in the process of taking that loss, now things get much easier, because we were talking earlier about the fact that if the Eagles win out, there's all of these, the Eagles have the tiebreaker, everything. Well, the Cowboys just gave them wiggle room now. I mean, essentially, I feel confident right now that the Eagles should win the East, and the Cowboys are going to have to now go on the road for a bunch of games in the playoffs, which is less than ideal.
And the thing about the Cowboys is they're great at home. I mean, great, like all-time good at home almost. They go on the road and they're not the same team. And now you're asking them to go on the road 3 times in the playoffs and make a Super Bowl. Unless something weird happens in a 7 seed is there for them in the NFC Championship. You know exactly what I'm talking about. And today I don't want to get on this roller coaster with the Cowboys of every time they lose, oh my goodness, the sky's falling. They're really not that good. This is a good football team. But it's hard to not be down on them a little bit after today, because they got dominated. This isn't a game where they were really competitive and the Bills just pulled it out the end because they're a desperate team. They got blasted from the first snap on. I mean, this was just clearly the Bills were the better team. And if you're the Cowboys, you could come out of this with a lot of questions about your toughness on defense, especially against the run. Dak playing on the road. He didn't show up today. Probably cost himself any shot at the MVP. We'll see how that plays out. And we'll talk about that again, probably when we get to San Francisco. But it's hard not to be down on the Cowboys a little bit, even though I don't want to overreact, because that's what we do with the Cowboys. It was a bad day for them, though.
Yeah, well, and Zach Martin, having his quad iced up, those are concerns moving forward. I'm with you. I'm not going to go too far to the right or left on this, knowing full well that right now, if the playoffs started today, they would have the Bucs in the first round. I think they would beat the Bucs, and they would be a heavy favorite against Tampa.
Bucs are feisty. Yeah, Bucs, you're right. No, they're a better team for sure. But it just goes to show that if that game was in Dallas, we'd be like, okay, well, whatever. On to round 2. They got to go on the road to a different team, man. I think they'd beat the Bucs. I think there's a lot of teams in the NFC they beat, but it gets a lot tougher when you got to go every single game on the road.
Yeah, and by the way, by beating the Bucs, by having the 5 seed, it just makes their entire path so much more difficult. And let's just get to it now. I mean, I have a hard time justifying Dak as the MVP after and it's not just this one game. It's the fact that now, we'll use the college football adage, you can't make the playoff if you get blown out. You forgive one blowout, but this is another time this year that we've seen the Cowboys just get crushed by a quality opponent. I struggled to get the San Francisco blowout out of my head. I don't know what to do now with 2 major blowouts. And when we think of this season and the body of work for Dak, I don't know how you can assign MVP to someone that has been invisible in 2 of the biggest games of the season.
Right. And, an MVP hasn't come from a wild card team since, I believe, 2008 was the last time. It's been 13 of the last 14 have been a quarterback from a 1 or 2 seed. We talked about that last week. And now it's it's just too many things stacking up against Dak. I mean, if he has a great final 3 games, you'd start to look at it and say, oh, this body of work since week whatever, pretty good. These are the stats. But I agree with you. As of right now, I think he played himself out of the MVP race, which is unfortunate because he's had a great season. He really has been fantastic this season. But, on some of the biggest stages, it just hasn't been great for him, especially San Francisco. And then today, this is something he's going to live with until, I mean, the one thing he could do is deep playoff run. Okay, nobody cares if you didn't win MVP if you make a deep playoff run. But, there's a lot of questions about whether Cowboys could do that now, and Dak's going to be a big part of that.
I mean, you think about who they're likely to face in the playoffs. They are going to face teams like the 49ers that beat them 42-10. They'll take on teams like the Eagles where, they have a big win last week, but they also lost them earlier this season. They'll take on teams like the Bills who just kicked their butts. And that's the hard part. Now, you look at what's ahead for the Cowboys. They still have to go to Miami. Then they have the Lions. Those are two good teams. They're going to be fighting for their own playoff positioning. So the Cowboys have got a gauntlet to get into the playoffs. And now the concept that they're going to have to go on the road makes that playoff run even tougher. It's either going to be battle tested or they're just going to run out of gas trying to get to where they're going.
Could be. It's almost a little bit odd in the way the pressure's off of them. The NFC East is done. It's done. I mean, even if Philly loses tomorrow night, they still have all the tiebreaker edges and the softest schedule in the NFL after tomorrow night in Seattle. So it's almost like at some point, if you're the Cowboys, you're like, well, we're the 5 seed. Let's just start thinking about the playoffs. We're not catching the Eagles. We'll see if that plays out that way exactly. But yeah, this was damaging for the Cowboys, not just in the fact that they probably lost any chance to win the NFC East, but just in their psyche too of, hey, can we really go on the road and beat good teams? Because you're going to have to in the playoffs. And I'm not sure the answer is yes to that.
Yeah, that's going to be the trick. And then, God knows, we all know that the minute that they lose in the playoffs, even if it's on the road, immediately starts do they have the right coach? Right. Do they have the right coach?
The yelling stuff's already starting up. The McCarthy, they're going to dump McCarthy. Come on, guys. No. Jerry Jones has fired one coach since 2010. But that's Dallas. You are 100% right in that it's going to be get rid of Dak, get rid of McCarthy, get rid of everybody after you go, 12-5 and win a wild card game.
But what you just said about Jerry Jones is important. I would remind everybody that the narrative that Jerry Jones is quick triggered in his coaching, he hasn't been that way since the early 90s. Frankly, I don't want to be judged for who I was in 1995, and I think we probably shouldn't judge Jerry Jones for that either. He's been a very big, how many years in a row did we hear that this is the last year for insert coach name here? And they always stick around. And then we heard, they're never going to get the Zeke deal done. They did. They're never going to get the Dak deal done. They did. Every year we just obsess over a false narrative around the Cowboys, there's some sort of weird merry-go-round of a franchise that they may have been in the late 80s, early 90s. I just think it's wildly unfair to the organization the way they're treated in that sense.
It's Cowboys, man. Everything is just an overreaction, good, bad, and different. It's what keeps the lights on here at old Yahoo Sports too, because people love debating the Cowboys, and it's especially good when they're bad. They're going to be the talk of everything all week. Whereas if they won, it'd be okay, good job, Cowboys. They lose, and the sky's going to be falling all week.
Yeah, but by the way, if you told the Stephen A's of the world that they weren't by law allowed to say the word Cowboys or Lakers for a week, you just take the week off of First Take. All right, so next up, speaking of the Cowboys, their opponent in the playoffs, threw some shade there, would be Tampa Bay. The Bucs taking on the Packers today. They get a statement win of their own, 34-20. They are now in first place in the NFC South. And the resurgence of Baker Mayfield continues. This is no longer just a cute story. This is a real story in the NFL this year.
Unbelievable. I mean, the game he had today, the first visiting quarterback to ever post a perfect passer rating at Lambeau Field, the third quarterback in NFL history to have at least 375 yards, 4 touchdowns, and a perfect passer rating in a game. Just 3 times ever. Ken O'Brien and Nick Foles, the other one, a very weird list, right? But I just love this Mayfield story because to me, and I don't think Mayfield's ever come out and it's explicitly said this, but you can kind of connect the dots. He signed a 1-year deal for $4 million with another $4.5 million you can make in incentives. The only reason you sign a deal like that, which isn't even backup money in the NFL, right? Taylor Heineke is making $5 million a year with the Atlanta Falcons. It'll be their backup over 2 years. Only reason you sign that deal is because you're that's my last chance to start. Otherwise, I'm on the backup train. That's just who I am the rest of my career. Maybe I get another shot like Geno Smith down the road. But Baker Mayfield said, screw the money. This is my one opportunity to start with a team that is dealing with the Tom Brady cap issues. They can't spend any money on a quarterback, so I'm going to be the guy, more than likely. And here he is thriving. And if you're the Buccaneers, you're re-signing Baker, right? I mean, it's also the point where you almost have to. Yeah, right? Is there any debate about that?
No, I mean, he's 28 years old, first and foremost.
That's crazy. So it just seems like he's been around forever.
Yeah, so he has time to continue to develop. And also, like, I loved what you said about his passer rating. I'll also point out he was sacked 5 times. Like, he was under duress at times in this game, and he still found a way through it. Like, I just, at some point, it's no longer just cute or gutsy or all of these things we like to label these quarterback comeback stories. Like, Baker Mayfield looks like he can play right now. He looks like a viable, does he look like a top 10 guy in the NFL? No. Does he look like a viable starter in the NFL that can win you a bunch of football games? Yeah, why not? Like, if I'm Tampa Bay, I got a bunch of other needs that are more pressing than quarterback right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in watching all the games today, it's like I could list off 12 teams that immediately with Baker Mayfield would be a significant, a crazy upgrade for them. Probably more than 12, probably 16 to 18 at this point. I mean, he's firmly a guy you can win with. You put enough talent around him, and the Buccaneers are kind of going to get out of this bad cap situation they had this year. You can be able to start building back up again. They're going to have to pay Mayfield, but I don't think he's a $50 million a year guy or anything. So they're still going to be getting a good price on him.
I mean, Baker Mayfield is this year's Geno Smith. This is clear, right? Like, he's a redemption story where he's come in with good weapons around him. They've figured out that, hey, we've got a quarterback we can rely on that's being coached really well by the organization. They're putting stuff around him he can execute. And the answer to his contract becomes very simple. Both sides can look at it and say, what did we do for Geno? And I think the Seahawks did a really smart deal in the sense that they gave themselves some protections and outs if Geno's not worth it. If it turned out to be a one-year flash in the pan, you do the same thing. You roll the dice the same way. Why would you not if you're Tampa Bay?
Yeah, really smart take there, because that's the template now. It's, hey, similar story. Geno got this. We'll give you this. And I don't see why Baker Mayfield would say no. Although I'll say this, if he hits the open market, there's going to be some teams out there who are like, well, we're not a draft position to take anybody. You just had a heck of a year. You're 28, like you pointed out. Sure, we'll roll the dice on you. But I think at some point, like, I think Baker's comfortable there. It's working for him there, and good for him. And also, by the way, we need to talk about the Packers too, because 7 days ago they looked like we're going to the playoffs. We just beat the Chiefs. We're awesome. Jordan Love is back. Everything's great. You lose to the Giants, and then you lose this at home. Like, the Buccaneers aren't a terrible team, but if you're a playoff team, you don't lose to the Buccaneers like this. Really disappointing week for the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, I 100% agree. This was the sort of game that you can't lose, you know. And if you're Green Bay, when you're a young football team, we always love to talk about how young football teams culturally have to learn how to win, right? They have to learn how to handle expectations, whatever we want to call that. But to your point, you can't come off of wins against two of the better teams in the league, and the Lions and the Chiefs, and then lose to Tommy Cutlets and the Bucs. Like, that's just not. No. That's not okay. Like, at some point, looking straight at LaFleur, you know, you got to look at LaFleur and say, hey, I mean, I was one that said a week and a half ago, good Lord, look at him. Maybe he deserves more credit. Now you look at it and say, I don't know, managing the roller coaster of a young roster is part of a coach's job. And I don't think that they're necessarily doing a great job of it.
Yeah, and it's the NFL. You're going to lose to games you, quote unquote, should not lose. I mean, it's not college. Like, even the Giants was like, oh, what an upset. They were 6-point underdogs. Like, they're not. It's not crazy. This isn't the Citadel beating Alabama, right? But the whole point that you're trying to make, and if you're not, I'll make it for you. You can't let that roll into 2 losses and 3 losses and 4. That's when you let your season slip away. And for the Packers to let that snowball into another loss today, that's the sin. It's not losing to the Giants. That happens, like you said, young team, handling success. It just, you lose to a team on the road, last second field goal, whatnot. But compounding that with the loss today is what really sets them back. And now they go from, it looked like a playoff lock. I mean, it was like, look at their schedule. They're going to make it. They might need to win out now to make the playoffs. They could, because the schedule kind of sets up that way, but they've really made a lot tougher on themselves.
As we stand right now, completing Sunday Night Football, according to NFL.com, the Packers are the 11th seed. There's that much ahead of them to try and get into the playoffs. So now, obviously, the Bills were the 11th seed in the AFC last week, so a lot can change in 1 week. But at 6-8, this has turned into a bit of an abject disaster for them, considering where they were. And I just would remind everybody, we've all learned the NFL is such a year-to-year league, wasting a year, and that's what it feels like. If you were 6-6 and you hit this this easy patch of your schedule, you shouldn't be where they are right now. Okay, we're going to break down all the action from the course of the weekend. So before we get to the rest of the Sunday action, let's at least let's tease everybody, get a little love to the Saturday games, because I do love when we get some Saturday NFL action. Minnesota takes on the Bengals, and look, you talk about guys that are going to get themselves paid. Like, what in the hell are we seeing with Jake Browning? Like, I kept thinking this was the week that maybe the wheels would fall off. They did not, and Jake Browning continues to impress at historic levels for somebody that has never really seen the field.
It took him his fifth season out of Washington to even get one NFL snap. I mean, that's not the usual path for a guy who becomes a good NFL quarterback. He had the 2 good games in a row, and I thought you watched him, and it's like, this is legit. Like, this is really happening. This guy's pretty good. And then this game against the Vikings, for 3 quarters, I was like, oh, wow, okay, the clock struck midnight, whatever. That happens to some guys. And then in the 4th quarter, he just came alive. Like, I was like, what are we watching right here? As I said about the Bengals before, I really think they're re-energized by this challenge of, hey, we love Joe Burrow. He's one of the great players in the NFL, but we're going to try to make it work with this guy. We believe in this guy. We're going to rally around him. T. Higgins makes that unbelievable touchdown catch to tie it. Plays like that. This Bengals team just seems like it believes in Jake Browning, and they should. Play great football. I think they're going to the playoffs, and they're not going to be an easy out in the playoffs either. They're, you would think like, oh, we get Jake Browning in the wild card round. It's almost like a bye. No, you don't really want to see Jake Browning. He's as hot as anybody in the NFL right now, a quarterback. I didn't expect to be saying that a month ago. I'll tell you that, but it's happening. It's just such a cool story and just a different story, unique story. You don't see guys, again, 5 years removed from their last college season, all of a sudden get their first shot in the NFL and become good.
Especially when the Bengals struggled at so many things. Like, they didn't run the ball particularly well in this game. 22 carries for 80 yards, long run at 10. I only say that because it spoke to how imbalanced they were. I thought T. Higgins had a couple of drops on plays that the number one epic receiver we all think he can be would usually make. And if you're a Vikings fan, you're looking around saying, how the hell did we lose that game? Like, if I told you Mullins would go 26-33 for 303 with 2 touchdowns, 2 picks, but 2 touchdowns, and that Ty Chandler would go off for 132 yards, you would think that's the recipe that means they got the production for a Vikings win. And it just, the wrong plays at the wrong time. It just felt like Minnesota got in their own way repeatedly in this football game.
They didn't make winning plays. They made losing plays. They just made you got 3rd and 1, you tried to tush push twice in overtime and you can't get a yard. Like, stuff like that was just killing them. Mullins had that terrible interception where he's just trying to dump the ball off and it lands in PJ Hill's lap. And just plays like that cost them. And this Viking season has to be so frustrating for them because they're playing well considering they're on their 4th starting quarterback. But at the end of the day, it's like, it could be so much better. They could be making themselves, it's such a better kind of path to the playoffs. But it's just, games like this, you're going to look back on if you don't make the playoffs and say, well, that's the reason we should had no business losing that game.
Yeah, and right now the Vikings sit at the 6th seed at 7-7, but they've got what feels like about a third of the league nipping at their heels. As it feels like most of the league is sitting right around that. Also on Saturday, Indianapolis the game was close for a minute, and then it wasn't. The Colts just they take the Steelers back behind the woodshed. I can't believe I'm saying that. And, a couple of things here. I think repeatedly right now, I continue to give credit to the Colts wide receivers who I was really wrong about early in the year. I didn't think they were going to be special. They are. They look really good. And conversely, the Steelers have fallen apart. Like, there's nothing that the Steelers do well right now offensively at all.
The difference between these teams was just so crazy in that the Colts were losing. I mean, let's not forget, I know Gardner Minshew's been starting most of the season, but he was a backup. Jonathan Taylor was out in this game. Michael Pittman got concussed in this game, and they were just taking guys off the bench. Trey Sermon, honest to goodness, I did not realize Trey Sermon was on the Colts. I didn't. Yeah. I was like, when Trey Sermon got in, I'm like, oh my God, Trey Sermon. And then he just starts running guys over. That's a team that handled its adversity really, really well. Whereas the Steelers are just a mess. I mean, Mike Tomlin's coming off the field at halftime talking about, we got no more safeties. Well, what about the Colts? They have no more running backs. They have no more receivers. They're dragging guys in off the bench, making plays. Those excuses do not sit with me because the Colts overcame it. And I think we need to ask the question, is Mike Tomlin their coach next season? I think the answer is yes, because the Steelers just don't fire head coaches. What do you think? I mean, we have to have a conversation about it.
He has to be, right? Like, I feel like there is some level of he has to be the coach next year, only because in my mind, as a Raiders fan, if you tell me that the Steelers let Mike Tomlin go tomorrow, it's going to take 6 seconds before Mark Davis is like, I'll give you $20 million a year. Like, that's what I want, right? Like, I want somebody that's a proven winner that always finds a way to get it done. And then look at how many people, when they leave the Steelers as players, are just disasters. Like, they're just disastrous acquisitions, disastrous players, sometimes disastrous human beings, like all the way across the board. When you think about what Tomlin navigates and has navigated, I don't like, I guess I hear, okay, maybe the message runs thin, but the other side of that is I can't find, I'm lucky enough to have a couple of friends that were Steelers at one point. I can't find anybody that has a negative word to say about those. The standard is the standard Tomlinisms, right? Like, so I don't even buy that portion of the argument. I just think the team sucks this year.
Maybe, but it's kind of sucked for a few years now. And this is such a collapse where you look at losses of the Cardinals, the Patriots, the way they just didn't really compete against the Colts, against a preseason lineup for the Colts offense. And I think you have to ask a question about Tomlin and his future. I do think he comes back. I think Tomlin is a Hall of Fame-ish resume, but at some point, this is just, if the standard is the standard, you're not meeting the standard anymore. Like, this isn't Steelers football anymore. And I know Steelers fans are fed up, and I understand why. I get it. It's something has to change with Pittsburgh, whether it's sweeping changes of coordinator. Obviously, we saw their offensive coordinator go. You hire somebody to reinvigorate that offense or make a big splash in a trade or something. But what the Steelers have been doing the past few years since they got off that really, really good start when Roethlisberger was still there, it's just been kind of miserable for them. Yeah, Tomlin's kept a streak going of not having a losing season, but I respect that. But at the same point, they are not close to a Super Bowl right now, not even in the same planet as a Super Bowl right now.
Where are we on the AFC South now? Because the Colts get a big win here, and now you have Houston, the Colts, and the Jags all sitting right there. And basically, they are all in position. All of them can make a case that they are going to win the division. I cannot believe I'm saying that. This division has turned into the most interesting race we have throughout the course of the NFL now.
The Jaguars are choking it away. I'll say that. I mean, that goes back to when they couldn't finish out the Bengals when in a game Burrow got hurt. I think the Jaguars win. I think they're the best team, but I'll tell you what, the Colts just keep coming. They just find ways to win. As we'll talk about with the Texans, they're a tough team, man. I don't know. If I was the Jaguars, I'd be really, really worried right now that they're the team sliding right now. The arrow's pointing down for them.
I mean, the Texans have left on their resume for the rest of the year. They're scheduled for the rest of the year. The Texans have the Browns, the Titans, and the Colts. That Colts matchup is going to be huge, right? Because obviously, but then when you look, frankly, at what the Jags have left in front of them, they have the Bucs, who we just talked about, have a ton to play for. Then they get the Panthers and the Titans. So, it feels like the path is a little easier, but at the same time, just based on how they're playing, I mean, the Jags, based on how they're playing right now, are not playing as well as the Texans, who went out and won with nothing. They had nothing on their roster. No reason to win that football game today. They still won, the Texans did. And the Colts went in on Saturday and looked dominant, even with Gardner Minshew. So, like, all three of them feel like playoff teams.
They do, yeah. I mean, and who thought that about the AFC South? We thought this was going to be another dog-awful year for that division. They're compelling. It starts with. I do think the Jaguars are still a good team somewhere, but man, it's been a while since we've seen it.
Do we now get to, let's move to another Saturday matchup here. Do we get to stop talking about the Broncos for a second? They got their butts whooped by the Lions 42-17. And like, it felt like a get-right game for the Lions, but they were just, I have exorcised the demons. They were doing all of that on the Broncos.
Yeah, Goff 5 touchdowns. They ran the ball well. They just, it's tough. When you get in a 1-5 hole, you have no margin for error, and it takes a lot of energy to dig out of it. And it just seemed like one of those games where the Broncos just couldn't match the Lions' energy. Lions upset about, some of their bad performances, especially the one in Chicago. Kind of took it out on the Broncos. I still think the Broncos are semi-alive for this wild card race, but it didn't help them that the Bills won. It didn't help them that the Texans won. So it was a bad loss for the Broncos, not just in how they got blown out, but they're standing in the playoff race.
Yeah, the playoff race on both sides, the margin of error is gone. for everybody. There is no more like every single team has their back against the wall, whether it's for seeding or whether it's for trying to sneak into the playoffs. Kudos to the NFL for the playoff changes they made, because this is interesting for everybody right now. Also interesting in today's matchups, one result that I think one play is it's going to force us to re-examine the way we're looking at an entire season, and it's difficult. Because the Bears lost on a Hail Mary, as everyone's calling it, 2017. The play was there to be made on a Hail Mary at the end of the game. Cleveland gets a win, and I don't want to minimize that, because I think what Cleveland's doing with Flacco is really incredible at this point. But if you're the Bears, I mean, this is another example of a tough loss where you played your tails off. Justin Fields showed again, like Justin Fields is showing enough that I feel like he's a quality starter. I don't know what the Bears should do, because they are likely going to have the first pick in the draft. And games like today make me think, oh, you know what? Run it back. Keep everything fine and trade that pick away for a bounty. Maybe that's the right approach. Like, I don't know right now.
Another layer to that is Matt Eberflus, who, when they were up 17-7 in the fourth quarter, I was like, this guy's keeping his job. Like, he's done enough. They were going to win their fourth game in 5. It looked dead for him earlier in the season, but then I was like, oh, he's going to save his job. Well, then it collapsed in the fourth quarter. Still a team that has a long way to go. I still think that Fields probably isn't the long-term answer, and they draft somebody, but we'll see. To me, though, this was the Browns. Like, this was, again, like kind of like I talked about before with Browning. It was like, okay, the wheels are falling off Joe Flacco through the pick six, not all his fault. Threw a really bad interception after a muff punt. Okay, the Flacco story's done. And then he just heats up in the fourth quarter. Hits Amari Cooper on a beautiful touchdown to get them back in the game. Hits a Joker for a few huge plays on their game-winning drive. I was really, really impressed. Kevin Stefanski, he's obviously in a Coach of the Year race. We'll talk about D'Amico too pretty soon. But, I mean, this team this was a huge win for the Browns. So pull that out of the fire. I just think it shows a little bit about their mettle, where they are as a team. They're going to the playoffs probably. This would have been a bad loss for them, but they pulled it out somehow.
Yeah, for Stefanski to get another win here with Joe Flacco coming off the trash pile, basically, and becoming your quarterback. No offense, Flacco. And also Flacco throwing 3 interceptions in this game. Like, I was pretty stunned, because there was definitely a spot, as you mentioned, in the fourth quarter, this thing was absolutely looked like it was sealed up for Chicago. And I kept looking at it thinking, okay, this is the moment. But to the Browns' credit, never seemed like they lost any sort of their momentum or belief in this process. Like, they stayed plucky. You got to give Njoku, by the way, some credit. He was absolutely unstoppable for the Browns throughout the course of this game. Like, I felt like the Browns were just slow and steady. It was a tortoise versus a hare. They were slow and steady. They were not worried at any point, rightfully so. So it's a big win for Cleveland for sure.
Yeah, you talk about a team that couldn't run the ball. They had nothing going on offense in the run game. Joe Flacco kind of carried him when he had to. It wasn't a whole game. He threw 44 times. I know that's not the formula they want, but pretty impressive that, I mean, back-to-back weeks, I think he's thrown 89 passes the past 2 weeks, something around there, and they keep winning. Like, this kind of is a winning formula for them. But to your point about Darnell Mooney, oh my goodness. Oh my, you have one chance to make one of the great, the Bears have a long, long history, and that would have been one of the great plays in Bears history.
If they win this game, if they win this game, I do think the Eberflus Fields conversation gets tougher. Like, it's amazing. A ball just bouncing out of your gut and off your foot is now creates, at least leaves the window open to have some sort of a conversation about the future of the franchise that I think a win would have absolutely swayed people the opposite direction.
Yeah, and you're looking, I mean, the rest of their schedule is not that bad. They could have legitimately won each of their last 3 games. They still could, I guess. But you're right. It's different to say, oh, you've won 3 out of your last 5 versus 4 out of your last 5. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about evaluating all these big things the Bears are going to have to do. It's kind of dumb to do it on one play, but at the same time, did you win? Yeah, I mean, that's how teams are judged. And they didn't win because Darnell Mooney it's a tough play. I'm not saying it, but you had it right there. Oh, it was so, it would have obviously been a play of the NFL season.
So I'm going to go off for a second here. I'm going to say something that's not very nice, Frank Schwab. And usually, you know me, I'm nice. But here's the thing. I don't think any win made me happier. Let me say it this way. I don't think any loss made me happier in the NFL this week than watching the Titans lose. Because if you are going to be, as an organization, classless enough to decide before the season even started that you're going to wear the Oiler jerseys when you take on Houston in Houston, that is, oh no, that game was in Tennessee. When you take on the Oilers, I should say, if you're going to be classless enough to make that decision, man, you deserve whatever you get, because relocation of a franchise, something I've lived as a fan and so many fans have lived, is already tender for the fans that are stuck there. I've spent my time in Connecticut, right? If you look at the Carolina Hurricanes, whenever they decide to wear the Hartford Whaler uniforms in the NHL, when they wear those sweaters, people up here go nuts because they loved that team and that team meant something to them. Like, when you decide that you are going to take your opportunity against a team to wear the throwbacks of that team, I just think that's classless. It's insulting. Nobody needed to do it. If they wanted to wear the Oiler jerseys, they had plenty of games on the schedule to do it. You didn't have to do it against Houston. So the fact that you went in and talked your talk and you still lost to a Texans team that was minus everybody, good. You deserved it.
I love that, man. I love that take. I really do. Glad you got a little mean for a second there.
Well, you know,
I totally agree with you. Like, there's such a, you're going to troll us? Okay, we're going to give you this L. We're going to give you this L in overtime because, I mean, and it's not like Nashville has any connection to these jerseys. Like, they're great. When I tune in, I'm like, whoa, that looks really cool. I remember Warren Moon and Earl Campbell and all those guys. But, I mean, for the Nashville fans, are like, whatever. Like, that doesn't mean much to us. But all it meant is it pissed off Houston fans. And then they delivered an L for you. Like, yeah, I agree. I thought it was awesome that they won that game just for that reason. And also, I think, who's your coach of the year right now? I mean, D'Amico, to get this win, Case Keenum as he picked Case Keenum as his quarterback. They just hung around in this game, Finally, Keenum made a big play, the game-tying touchdown. They got the plays they needed overtime to win. Didn't have Will Anderson either in this game. They're two prized rookies, C.J. Stroud and Will Anderson out. Get this win they needed, stay in this playoff race. I'm probably voting D'Amico. I'll accept arguments for Stefanski and other guys, but who's your coach of the year right now?
No, D'Amico. Clearly,
Yeah,
I think it's D'Amico. And if you look at the history of Coach of the Year, it's always somebody that's on a team that was expected to underperform, right? So this only makes sense. But by the way, I think the method, like, this is more proof positive that the right things are in the right places for the Texans to be good for a minute. Because when you win a game like this against a division rival, which is always tougher, when you win that game in that moment, as shorthanded as the Texans were, especially at the quarterback position, I got nothing but respect for what they're doing now for the Texans. They have accelerated far ahead. Like, if I'm making a 5-year look ahead right now, I'd much rather be a Texans fan than a Titans fan, for sure.
Right,
no doubt.
And talk about that look ahead, like, this game is kind of a test of, okay, how good is D'Amico Ryans? Is it, I mean, CJ Stroud's awesome. Like, we all watch the tape. Like, we're like, oh my goodness, this guy pops. Can you win without him? Can you go on the road and beat a well-coached Titans team without? They did pass that test. So if you're the Texans, you're like, this guy ain't just because he got a great rookie quarterback. He's a good coach. Like, that was an impressive win for D'Amico. And you feel even better about a Texans fan going forward because you know you got the right quarterback and the right coach now.
Yeah, I'm not sure the Jets know anything right now other than they got their kicked 30-0. Should Saleh keep his job? I mean, the Jets eliminated from playoff contention, but above and beyond all of that, we just talked about at the beginning of the show, watching the Chargers where you could see that they had quit, right? You could feel it. Felt like that to me watching the Jets today. Like, a couple of guys have fire and a lot of guys were just standing around.
I mean, Zach Wilson looks great last week, throws for 300 and comes out. And there was one point where I made the stats a little wrong, but I don't think it's that much wrong. They'd run 21 plays and had 2 yards. Like, what are we doing here? Like, oh, the Jets just, and now this whole nonsense about Aaron Rodgers coming back. Why would he come back? I think they just threw that out there because they knew they were going to lose to the Dolphins anyway. So whatever, it makes Aaron look like a hero. We'll see where that goes. Yeah, the Jets are just a dumpster fire. And you're right. You do have to ask serious questions about Robert Saleh. Is this the guy we want? Because he surely didn't look that good today, especially on defense. I will say this. I know there's not a ton of Tua Tagovailoa haters yet. I mean, people probably at least tip their cap a little bit, but there are some who, he just got Tyreek. That's the only reason he's good. Well, he didn't have him today. He balled out. He completed, I believe, his first 13 passes. Jalen Waddle became a great, he was their weapon today, and he just kept feeding them over and over. Tua is a good quarterback, and I think today was big for him, for the Dolphins to have confidence in him going forward. Let's not forget, Tua's contract is coming to the end. I mean, he's got 1 year left on his rookie deal after this year. They're going to have to make a decision of, is this guy a $50 million a year type of guy? A day like today, makes them think like, well, he didn't even have Tyreek. And look at how he played against a good Jets defense. I thought this was a huge day for Tyreek for the Dolphins, not just the contract stuff, but also just to have confidence going forward of this is a great quarterback. And he's better with Tyreek because anybody would be, but he's not just a product of Tyreek Hill.
It also speaks to what you mentioned earlier. You can't let one loss catapult into two losses, snowball.
Right.
And that loss to the Titans was really inexcusable. So to see them come out with the thunder of the gods and sort of stop that negative momentum didn't surprise me. It's also a statement for the Dolphins, even if it's a bad team that they beat. The Chiefs also beat a bad team. 27-17 win over the Patriots in a game that was actually a little, I love to say plucky all the time, but this game was pluckier than the final score gave us. Like there were some times early on in the game where I was watching the Chiefs struggle offensively and just thinking to myself, man, you can't lose this one. Like, there's no way. Now the Chiefs pull it out 27-17, like I said. I didn't walk away from it any more confident. I don't think I learned anything in this game other than a good team beat a bad team.
No, that's exactly it. I don't have much to say other than I was watching this Patriots game, offense, like, this is the offense they really constructed. Like, Hunter Henry is kind of the focal point, and Devontae Parker and Zeke Elliott. I mean, it's just a slow, bad, boring offense that the Patriots have here. And yeah, the Chiefs handle business. Mahomes was really good in this game, I thought. He rebounded well after his temper tantrum, but still another week of Kadarius Toney, right? Ball right in his hands, goes to the opponent who picks it off. Mahomes is obviously very upset on the bench and just kind of not even muttering. He is just yelling out, and you could read his lips. It was not very kind to Kadarius Toney. You play Kadarius Toney, you kind of get what you get, and it didn't cost the Chiefs today, but I'm telling you, this isn't the last time we've had this Kadarius Toney conversation.
Well, what's going to be interesting is that right now the Patriots have the number 2 draft pick, according to Tankathon. They have the same record as the Cardinals, but their strength of schedule this year has been very close, but it's been a little easier. So the fact that they've had a bad record with an easier schedule gives them the tiebreaker in this. That's only of note because if you look at the rest of the season, right now Arizona has the Bears coming up, the Eagles coming up, the Seahawks coming up. Those are all 3 teams. Well, the Eagles and Seahawks, I should say, are 2 teams that have pretty good records. And then when you look at it on the other side, the Patriots have the Broncos, the Bills, and then the Jets. So ironically, the Jets sucking might actually be the thing if the Patriots lose out that gets them the second overall pick. Look at that. That's the deep dive you didn't know you needed on the NFL draft standings. My God. Speaking of teams that are only playing for the draft, the Giants lose to Derek Carr and the Saints 24-6. Again, this is just one of those, the Giants, I think as much as everybody loved the Tommy Cutlett story, let's also remember that under DeVito, they were still only averaging 17.6 points a game. So it's not like they were explosive in this situation. We talked about margin for error. There is none for this Giants team. They're not particularly good. So they came out, they had some issues. DeVito knocked out of this game at one point. That definitely played into it. But the Giants offense was just putrid.
Yeah, and it stinks because the DeVito story's so fun. I got into it, but you were reminded today. Yeah, it's still Tommy DeVito. I don't take much away from this game either. Giants are a bad team. The Saints are a bad team too. They just happen to beat a worse team. I guess it's saying something that it did this without Olave and a couple of their other guys. But the Saints to me are still a bad team. But at least they didn't lose. I mean, good for you, New Orleans. You're still in that NFC South race.
I mean, so yeah, let's go to the other game in that division because Carolina.
Do we have to?
I cannot believe it. Carolina.
I mean,
they got nothing to play for. They don't get that first overall pick anyway. But Carolina gets the win over the Falcons 9-7. 9-7 in the sort of, and remember, like we said earlier, at this point, the Buccaneers are in first place in the AFC South. So this game had huge consequences because now, as it stands, the Buccaneers would be the 4th seed in the playoffs. The Saints are 8th. They are just out of it at 7-7, and the Falcons fall all the way to 10th at 6-8. Like the Falcons may have just dug themselves a hole they can't get out of by losing to the Panthers.
The 1-win team, and you go there and lose. And I get it was raining, and it was kind of miserable, but I mean, this is probably the game that cost Arthur Smith his job, right? I mean, you can't lose in this situation and miss the playoffs as a result. We'll see. Maybe they'll rally, win this division because the division is not very good. But what a miserable loss, and just kind of some of the things that happened. I mean, Bijan Robinson. I'm not saying Bijan Robinson was having a great game, but he fumbles, plays no snaps the rest of the way. Okay, good for you, Arthur Smith. You died on that hill. Great way to show him. In losing to the 1-win Panthers. And, they had a chance to put the game away. Desmond Ridder throws a an interception. That just, okay, well, that's what happens when you just say, we're good at Desmond Ridder quarterback. We want to see what the kid's got. Well, okay, that's what you get. You get an interception that leads to a loss to the 1-win Panthers. And also, just at the end of the game, there's a minor thing, but Chuba Hubbard runs for a first down. He's at about the 2-yard line. Let him score. If you're a well-coached team, let him score. You understand the situation. Nope, they drag him down, and the Panthers are like, cool, we'll take a D twice and kick a 20-yard field goal, win the game. I mean, it was a debacle for Atlanta. Got none of their star players involved, as usual with Arthur Smith. And this loss, unless they rally and win the division, I assume this loss is going to cost Arthur Smith a job.
Yeah, and the decision to keep Desmond Ridder is, I think, one of the biggest fails of any organization this season. The decision not to try and find a way to push him with somebody viable. I mean, you risked your whole season on the development of a kid that obviously isn't ready to be the starting quarterback for this franchise, may not have what it takes to do that anyway. The fact that you can't make that sort of a risk decision and not pay a consequence for it at the end of the year. Speaking of weird games that were kind of ugly, the Rams beat the Commanders 28-20. Should note, garbage touchdown near the end of that made it feel a little closer than it was. This was really the Rams in control throughout the entire game. Washington made it close at the end, but the Rams get a big win here.
Yeah, and I mean, again, Sean McVay's doing a great job. Ron Rivera's probably going to get fired very soon. The interesting part, Sam Howell gets benched. Jacoby Brissett comes in, has more yards in a half a quarter than Sam Howell had in 3.5. I don't assume Sam Howell starts again for Washington this year. We'll see where that goes. But yeah, not a very, good on the Rams, bad on the Commanders. Let's get to the next game because there actually is some intrigue with that one.
Yeah, by the way, Commanders eliminated from the playoffs. I should note the Panthers, Cardinals, Commanders, Titans, Jets, and Patriots have all been officially eliminated. So your season is over for all of you. Start looking towards the draft. The big game this afternoon, other than the ones we've talked about, was a statement win for the 49ers. I don't think that's a shock to get a 45-29 win over Arizona, but it was a reminder. Sometimes you have to be slapped in the face with dominance to remember how great it is. I felt like Christian McCaffrey went full Bugs Bunny, pulled the glove off, and just slapped America in the face and said, "I'm Christian damn McCaffrey. Give me some credit."
My goodness, he's good. He is just such a good player. I when he came out of Stanford, I was like, this guy's not going to hold it. What, you're drafted a guy 8th overall, and he's going to be like a gadget type of player? No, he's one of the toughest dudes in the NFL. He's one of the toughest dudes to bring down in the NFL. He does everything you want out of a football player. We're talking about this guy, not to get crazy, but we're talking. He's in that like LaDainian Tomlinson as far as versatility goes, the Walter Payton type of guy. He is that good, people. Like, he is a Hall of Fame guy. This is unbelievable career Christian McCaffrey's having. I hope he stays healthy for many more years to come because he's just such a joy to watch. I think the big story out of this I wrote about was Purdy became the MVP favorite in this game, betting wise. I got the odds. I gave Brock Purdy, unless Lamar's jumped him since we started taping. Brock Purdy's the odds-on favorite to win MVP, and it kind of fits the formula of number 1 seed, quarterback putting up good numbers. There's a lot of numbers that say Brock Purdy is the MVP of this league. Take away the names, take away the draft pedigree, get rid of your biases, just look at the numbers, and you probably come to Brock Purdy as your MVP. Brock Purdy himself said, no, Christian McCaffrey's the MVP of the league. I'll stump for him, not me. I thought that was really classy of Brock to do. Good teammate. Where do you stand on the MVP race right now? Because I'm fascinated by it. I seem to write about it multiple times a day. It's as wide open as I can remember 3 games to go.
Yeah, I think Purdy's the front runner here. I would put Lamar in that conversation also. I don't think there's a more dominant player in the NFL right now than Christian McCaffrey, but I think you're also right, or Tyreek Hill. Maybe I will hold myself accountable to that. But I think Tyreek was going to have to hit 2,000 yards, and now having missed today's game, that's not likely to happen.
And the Dolphins playing really well without him doesn't help his case. Right, if they would have put up 6 points today, you'd have been like, "Look, Tyreek, well, they played really, really well without him, and it doesn't help his case."
And if I came to you, I love what you said about the numbers. I'm just going to say this: 16-25, which is a 64% completion percentage for 242 yards, 4 touchdowns, passer rating of 135.3. That's what happened today for Brock Purdy. If you look overall this year, just under 70% completion percentage for just under 3,800 yards with 29 touchdowns and 7 interceptions, a quarterback rating of 119. The numbers. Yeah, you're right.
For a number 1 seed, I think they're going to win the number 1 seed. Maybe they don't. Maybe they lose the Ravens or something, then the Eagles sneak in there. But I mean, and for the nerds out there like me, his EPA per play, basically everybody who's put up his EPA per play is one MVP. He's having almost historic type of season in some of the advanced stats, the efficiency stats. I do think one other name in it we have to throw in there for the MVP is Josh Allen. If that team does win the AFC East and he continues and puts up 40-plus touchdowns total, like I think he's got a case, and he's more of a comfortable name brand. Like if you vote for Josh Allen, you're not like, did I really just vote for Mr. Irrelevant as my MVP? I think that he'd be a more comfortable pick, so maybe he wins it that way. But I think if you're really trying to break down who will win the MVP, not who should, because that's weird, who will win the MVP, I think you look at the formula, and it's Brock Purdy right now. And that's why he's the favorite. And it's not unjustified because he's got the numbers to back it up.
Very reminiscent of what we just saw with the Heisman race. It's wild to me that we're this close to the end of the season and we don't really know. Like, it's great. But it does speak to the fact that weeks 16, 17, 18 are going to be huge weeks for this because the race is so wide open right now. Somebody having one bad game for Dak today took him out of the running, right? Like in my mind, at least for now. So,
and let's real quick. Ravens 49ers next week, then maybe that's a loser leaves town for the MVP, right? Like whoever wins that is got to feel like the favorite. I mean, who knows how they play? I mean, maybe Purdy throws 5 interceptions and they win. I don't know, but it almost feels like that's kind of an MVP elimination game.
I do want to quickly mention something on the Monday night game for anyone that hasn't seen. A couple of things that are really important here. Geno Smith, questionable. Jalen Hurts, questionable with an illness that apparently got worse last night. We'll see where he is. But really important here, Matt Patricia is going to be calling the defensive plays for the Eagles. So while their defensive coordinator will be in the booth observing, Patricia will be on the field calling plays. Frank, that felt weird to me when I read it.
I got news for the Philadelphia Eagles trying to leak this out and make it seem better. It is. If you're not calling the plays, if somebody else is calling the plays, you are no longer the coordinator. I just have to put that out there, okay? And if your answer to anything is Matt Patricia, you are having the wrong question, my friend. That is not a path you want to go down. When is the last time Matt Patricia ran a good defense? I think this is a shockingly desperate move by a good team. Like, who knows? We talked about the Buffalo Bills and how that offensive coordinator situation worked out so well for them. But Matt Patricia, really? Like, ooh, this kind of speaks to me. I didn't look at this news as being like on the surface. I looked beneath the surface and said, Eagles are a little bit desperate now, right? Like, there's a lot more panic with the Eagles than I thought there was.
Especially this close to the playoffs. I don't know that I want to bring a new voice into everything with just a few weeks until we get to this. This feels like the ultimate throwing spaghetti against a wall to see what sticks. And that doesn't seem like something that a team in contention for the number one seed.
They're 10-3.
I don't understand it.
It was weird. It was weird.
Yeah. And the Patricia part of it, you're 1,000% right too. Like, talk about getting fired up. Like, and by that, I don't mean fired up like energetic. I mean, like every time he gets fired, it seems like he just gets a raise. He gets fired up. He levels up every time. Like, the Patricia thing, I don't understand at all. I don't understand how it makes the Eagles different, better. But I do think it'll be a difference to pay attention to. All right. You can pay attention to Charles McDonald. He'll be back on Tuesday with the Exempt List, as always, one of our great shows. I'm back on Wednesday with Charles Robinson, Jory Epstein for Inside Coverage. You can leave us a voicemail, speakpipe.com/0blitz. That's how you get in on the fun. Follow us on social media at Jason Fitz, at Yahoo Schwab, at SJ Rochelle. That's for Stone, our producer behind the glass, doing God's work. Leave us that 5-star review. Even if you didn't like it, damn it, leave us that 5-star review. And most importantly, rate, subscribe, tell your friends, your family, enemies. Tell everybody to hang out with us every single week. We will be back. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Christmas Eve? Yeah, I might be in a fat man suit, but we're going to be sitting here reacting to everything you need to know. And then I'll be drinking eggnog while I'll tell you what to expect on Christmas Day when my beloved Raiders play. So, in other words, Christmas will not slow this show down. We will be back on Christmas Eve. Stuff that in your chimneys. All right. Thanks for hanging out with us. Have a great week. We'll see you next week.